Chapter 1. The Orientation. Mira Walsh had been dead for 3 weeks, and the paperwork was somehow worse than the dying. The orientation packet was 47 pages long. She knew this because she had counted them, twice, with the grim focus of someone who had spent 6 years as an HR compliance officer and could spot an institutional failure at 50 paces. She was spotting them now. There were, by her preliminary count, 19. "So this section covers your feeding schedule," said Gretchen, the integration wing coordinator, with the luminous smile of a woman who had been professionally cheerful since the Napoleonic Wars. "We find that new residents do best on a structured plan, every 6 hours with a top-up before rest period if needed." "There's no grievance process," Mira said. Gretchen blinked. "Sorry?" Page 12, Resident Responsibilities. There's a full section on what I'm supposed to do. There's no section on what happens if the institution fails me. No ombudsman, no escalation pathway, no complaint form. "Well, we find that most residents are so excited about their new, page 19, community integration activities. You've listed moonlit garden walks and nocturnal book club. There's nothing about job retraining, legal identity support, or how to explain to my landlord why I'm never coming back for my security deposit. We do have a social committee, page 24, nutritional guidance. The entire section is 3 paragraphs. One of them is about the importance of staying hydrated. I'm a vampire. What am I hydrating?" Gretchen's smile was holding, but barely. "Blood is technically a fluid, page 31, embracing your new potential. It reads like a cruise ship brochure. Your nights are your oyster, actual quote. And on page 33, there's a section called Celebrating Your New Self that suggests journaling. Journaling, about being dead. Many residents find it therapeutic. I don't need therapy. I need an HR department." Gretchen's smile finally cracked. She had been doing this for 200 years, and no one had ever audited the orientation packet in real time. "Mira, I understand this is an adjustment. Adjustment." Mira set the packet down. Her hands were shaking. They did that now. 3 weeks of heightened everything. Every sound a scream, every light a floodlight, every heartbeat in the building a drum she couldn't turn off. And her body hadn't figured out how to be still yet. "I didn't apply for an adjustment. I didn't submit a transfer request. A stranger attacked me in an alley behind my office, bit me, and left me to transform alone over 3 days on the concrete. I woke up in a dumpster bay with no heartbeat and a craving I can't say out loud without wanting to throw up. And your intake form, page 38, by the way, in 8-point font buried under administrative notes, has a consent question pre-checked as yes." Gretchen was quiet for a moment. Then, "I understand this feels, don't. Overwhelming, but in a century or two, I didn't ask for a century or two." The room went quiet. The integration wing was designed to feel welcoming. Warm colors, modern furniture, large windows with UV filtering glass so residents could see daylight without dying in it. It looked like a boutique hotel designed by someone who had never asked a single guest what they actually needed. A voice from the doorway. "She's right, you know." Mira turned. A man was leaning against the frame, young-looking, maybe 25, though that meant nothing here. He had the faintly dazed expression of someone who had been turned recently enough to still find the whole thing surreal. "I'm Jonas, wing resident, 3 months." He shrugged. "Nobody asked me either." "Asked you what? If I wanted this?" He said it casually, like commenting on the weather. "My sire said she was saving my life. I had a cold. A regular human cold." She panicked. He paused. "I'm immortal now because of a head cold." Mira stared at him. "And you're okay with that?" "I mean, I don't have a cold anymore." He shrugged again. "The orientation packet says I should journal about it." Gretchen looked like she wanted the floor to open. Before Mira could respond, every vampire in the building went still. Not the subtle stillness she was learning to recognize in individual vampires. This was collective, synchronized. Like a flock of birds changing direction at once, except the direction was freeze. Footsteps in the corridor. Measured. Unhurried. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who had never once been late for anything because the world arranged itself around his schedule. Henry Whitlock, vampire king of the Eastern Court, walked into the integration wing lobby like a man visiting a department he hadn't known existed until this morning. He was tall. Dark hair shot through with premature silver that was 600 years past premature. Eyes that were a shade too dark to be ordinary brown, closer to old amber, the kind that caught light in a way that made you look twice. He wore a dark suit that fit with the quiet precision of something made by someone who understood that this man would stand still in it for hours, and it had better not wrinkle. Gretchen stood so fast, her chair rolled into the wall. "Your Majesty," "The Walsh file," he said, not a question. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that had been giving orders for so long it had forgotten how to not give them. Gretchen fumbled for a tablet. She's right here, actually. She's in the middle of orientation." Henry looked at Mira. She looked back. She was too angry and too overwhelmed to be intimidated by a man in a nice suit, even one the entire building was apparently terrified of. "You're Mira Walsh," he said. "You're reading my file upside down." He glanced at the tablet Gretchen had handed him, turned it around without comment. The non-consensual checkbox. "What about it?" "It's checked." "Yes, because it was non-consensual. That's how checkboxes work." Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement, not quite, but the faintest acknowledgement that she had said something he wasn't expecting. "This is the first time in the wing's history that box has been checked." He looked at Gretchen. The temperature in the room dropped, not literally, but the quality of his attention changed, and 200 years of Gretchen's professional warmth wilted under it. "Is that because no one has been turned without consent? Or because no one has been asked?" Gretchen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The form has been in standard use since—" "That was not my question." Silence. Jonas, from the doorway, raised his hand like a schoolchild. "I wasn't asked." Henry turned to him, read him in one glance, the dazed, recent turn, the casual shrug covering something unprocessed. Then back to Mira. He was doing the stillness thing, the statue quality that older vampires had, where they stopped being a person in the room and became a fixed point that the room existed around. 3 weeks in, and she already hated it. "You didn't choose this," he said. "No." Something changed in his face. Not a dramatic shift. Vampires didn't do dramatic shifts unless they wanted to. A micro-adjustment. The set of his jaw. The focus in his eyes sharpening to something that wasn't political or administrative. Something older. "That matters," he said. "That matters enormously." He left. Just like that. The room exhaled. Gretchen collapsed back into her chair. Jonas let out a breath he probably didn't need to hold anymore. Mira stared at the door he'd walked through. "Who was that?" "That," Gretchen said weakly, "was the king. He's the first person in 3 weeks who asked me what happened instead of telling me how to feel about it." Jonas wandered over. He was kind of intense. He was the first one who listened. Yeah, well. Jonas glanced at the door. His hands were shaking. Mira frowned. No, they weren't. He was perfectly still. His right hand, the one holding the tablet. Just barely. You probably couldn't see it from where you were sitting. Jonas shrugged for the 3rd time. Vampire senses. Silver lining of the head cold situation. Mira looked at the door again. At the corridor the king had walked down. At the orientation packet in front of her, 47 pages of institutional failure, and the one checkbox on page 38 that had brought the most powerful vampire in the Eastern Court to a lobby that smelled like lavender air freshener and institutional denial. She picked up her red pen. Page 14. Your emergency procedures don't include a single reference to sunlight protocol for newly turned residents. What happens if there's a fire evacuation during daytime? Gretchen stared at her. No one has ever asked that. That, Mira said, is the problem. Chapter 2. The Standard Procedure. The King's office sent a formal notice to the integration wing the next morning. It was one paragraph long, and it said, in language that managed to be both bureaucratic and threatening, that His Majesty would be conducting a personal review of the Walsh case as a matter of institutional priority. This is unprecedented, Gretchen told Mira, holding the letter like it might bite her. Does that mean good or bad? It means I've been running this wing for 200 years, and the King has visited exactly once before. And that was because we had a plumbing emergency that flooded the East Corridor with blood supply. Sounds like an OSHA violation. A what? Occupational safety and, never mind, human thing, she paused. Was it a biohazard? We're vampires. Blood is groceries. I'm going to need a minute with that sentence. Henry arrived that evening with a woman, sharp-featured, silver-haired, dressed in charcoal gray, carrying a leather notebook that looked older than most countries. Mira Walsh, this is Dorothea, my chief of staff. Thea, the woman said, extending a hand. Her grip was cool and precise. I've served His Majesty for 400 years. In that time, he has personally overseen exactly 0 integration cases. She let that sit. This is standard procedure. She said standard procedure the way a naturalist might say the platypus is a perfectly normal animal. Standard procedure, Henry confirmed, not looking at Thea. Thea opened her notebook and wrote something. Mira had developed acute hearing against her will and caught the scratch of pen on old paper. Day 1. Claimed standard procedure. No such procedure exists in any charter, bylaw, or historical record of the Eastern Court. I'd like to review the circumstances of your turning, Henry said. He sat across from her in the wing's consultation room. He sat perfectly still. Mira sat with her leg bouncing, her fingers tapping the armrest, her jaw clenched against the 6 heartbeats she could hear through the walls. She reached for the water glass on the table, a courtesy for visitors, though vampires didn't drink water, and the glass shattered in her hand. Just like that, no squeeze, no pressure. Just the ordinary motion of picking up a glass and then glass everywhere. Oh, 4. She stared at her hand, not a scratch. That's the 4th one today. I broke the consultation room doorknob this morning. Gretchen had to call maintenance. Strength calibration takes time. How much time? Months, sometimes years. It depends on the individual. Wonderful. I'm going to destroy every piece of dishware in this building. We'll switch to metal cups. That is not the point. What is the point? The point is that 3 weeks ago I could hold a coffee mug like a normal person, and now I'm a liability to ceramics. She brushed the glass shards off the table. This body doesn't feel like mine. It moves wrong. It hears wrong. Everything is too fast and too sharp and too much. Your hands, Henry said. What about them? They haven't stopped moving since I sat down. Everything is too loud. My body doesn't know what to do with it yet. What specifically? Right now? I can hear Gretchen in the staff kitchen heating up a blood bag. The microwave beeps at a frequency that I can only describe as personally offensive. There's a bird on the roof that has been scratching at the same spot for 40 minutes. And your chief of staff's pen is somehow louder than all of it. She pressed her palms flat on the table. They shook. I was an HR compliance officer. I sat in quiet rooms and reviewed documentation for a living. Now I can hear someone's phone vibrating 2 floors up, and it sounds like a jackhammer. That fades. When? Within the first year, faster with guidance. The orientation packet says, your enhanced senses are a gift, page 23. I will have someone revise the packet. I've already done it. She pulled a marked-up copy from under the table, red pen everywhere, marginal notes in handwriting that got progressively angrier toward the back. 47 pages of institutional failure. I flagged the critical issues and ranked them by severity. Color-coded. Red is urgent. There's a lot of red. Henry took the document. He read it. Not skimming, reading, page by page, with the focused attention he'd give a treaty or a declaration of war. The room was quiet except for the heartbeats Mira couldn't stop hearing. "This is thorough," he said. "It's my job. Was my job," she caught herself. "The job I can't go back to because I'm dead, and also because sunlight would kill me, and the office has a skylight." "What do you miss most?" Nobody at the wing had asked her that. "Tuesday mornings," she said, before she could stop herself. "I used to walk to the farmer's market before work. 7 a.m. The light was this specific yellow, not the blue kind of morning, the yellow kind, like the sun was doing it on purpose. I bought coffee I didn't need and tomatoes I never cooked. Every Tuesday for 4 years. You bought tomatoes you didn't cook? It was aspirational produce. I was going to become a person who cooked. And now? Now I can't taste food, I can't see sunlight, and my farmer's market doesn't have a 2 a.m. shift." She stopped. "Sorry, you asked a simple question." It wasn't a simple question. He was doing the stillness thing again, not the statue freeze from before, but something different. The stillness of someone who was listening so carefully that even the involuntary motions had stopped. He had stopped blinking. He had, she realized, stopped breathing. "You're doing it," she said. "Doing what?" "The thing where you stop being a person and become furniture." "I am listening." "You can listen and breathe at the same time. Humans do it constantly." A pause. Then he drew a deliberate breath, performative, like a man who had been reminded to do a thing he'd forgotten was expected. "Better?" "Marginally. You look like a mannequin who's been told to act natural." From across the room, Thea coughed. "Precisely." "Is there an HR department for Vampire Society?" Mira asked. She didn't know why she asked. It came from the part of her that was still a compliance officer, the part that looked at every institution and thought, where is the accountability structure? Henry considered this with full gravity. There is a council of elders that governs disputes. Is there a complaint form? He paused, genuinely paused. Not the vampire stillness, but an actual human pause of someone working through an unexpected question. "I don't believe so. You don't have a complaint form. The council predates paper." "Then how does someone lodge a grievance?" "Historically, they petition the court." "Petition, as in write a formal request and wait?" "There is a queue." "How long is the queue?" Another pause. "Thea?" "Current estimated wait time for non-urgent petitions," Thea said without looking up from her notebook, "is 11 years. 11 years? "The council meets quarterly," Henry said, and Mira could see, she could actually see, the moment when he heard himself say it and realized how it sounded. 11 years to file a complaint. No intake form, no ombudsman. The consent box is pre-checked. She leaned back. "You don't have an HR problem. You have a systemic governance failure. And I say that as someone who once audited a company that was using the break room as a chemical storage facility." Henry looked at her, then at the marked-up orientation packet, then at Thea, who was writing with the quiet intensity of someone documenting a historically significant event. "I will have a complaint form created," he said. "I'll design it." "That is not necessary. It is absolutely necessary. I've seen your intake forms. Whoever wrote them thinks celebrating your new self is appropriate language for someone who woke up dead in an alley." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up a pen from the table and held it out to her. "Take this." "Why?" "Take it without breaking it." She reached for it. The pen snapped in her fingers. Ink everywhere. On the table, on her hand, on the orientation packet. "I rest my case about the institutional failures," she said, staring at the ink on her palm. Again. He produced another pen. Where he'd been keeping a spare pen, she had no idea, though knowing a 600-year-old king, probably in a pocket specifically designated for backup writing instruments. She took it. Slower. It cracked but didn't shatter. Better, he said. The calibration is mental, not physical. You're applying the force you remember from being human. Your body has changed the equation. You need to think lighter. Think lighter. Imagine you're holding something you can't afford to break. Like what? Whatever you value most. She thought about it, reached for a third pen. Thea's, borrowed from across the table with a nod of permission. She held it the way she used to hold the red pen when she was about to circle something critical on an audit report. Carefully. With intention. It held. There, Henry said. She looked at the pen, unbroken, in her hand. Such a small thing. Such an absurdly small thing to feel like a victory. I held a pen, she said. You held a pen. This is the most pathetic milestone of my life. It's a beginning. She looked at him, at the ink on the table between them, at the two broken pens and the one intact one, at the way he was watching her hold an unbroken pen like she'd just negotiated a peace treaty. You're doing it again, she said. The looking at me like I did something important thing. You did do something important. I held a pen. For the first time in 3 weeks. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say it was nothing, that it was embarrassing, that a grown woman shouldn't feel triumphant about not destroying office supplies. But he was looking at her with that specific focus. Not the political attention, not the king assessing a situation attention, but the other one. The one she didn't have a name for. And it was the most seen she'd felt since she woke up in a dumpster bay. He reached for the pen. To take it back, or to examine it, or for some reason that he would later file under standard procedure. His fingers brushed hers. They both went still. Not the vampire stillness she'd catalogued, a different kind. The kind where every sense narrows to a single point of contact. His fingers were cool. Not cold the way the rest of him was cold, just cool enough that the difference registered. And her hand, the one that had been shaking for 3 weeks, the one that had just held a pen without breaking it for the first time, that hand didn't shake. His thumb shifted a 1/4 inch. Not a stroke, not a caress. Just the smallest adjustment, and even that was more than he'd meant to do. She could tell because his jaw clenched. The ghost memory thing. He withdrew carefully, with the deliberate control of a man removing himself from something he hadn't authorized himself to want. I will return tomorrow to review your designs, he said. His voice was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago. His hands, clasped behind his back now, were not. Standard procedure? He stood. Standard procedure. After he left, Thea lingered. She wrote one more line, closed her notebook, and paused at the door. He has used the phrase standard procedure 7 times in 2 days. She looked at Mira. In the preceding decade, he used it twice, both times accurately. From the hallway, faintly, Dorothea! Coming, Your Majesty. She turned to go, then added, almost as an afterthought, He's smiling. He'll deny it, but he is. Chapter 3. The Intake Form. By the end of the first week, Jonas found Mira in the intake office at 4 a.m., surrounded by red-marked documents. 3 things, she said without looking up. 3 things that have never happened in this wing's history. I rewrote the orientation packet from scratch. The king approved it in 12 hours. Yeah, I heard. Gretchen cried in the break room. Second, I briefed every staff member on trauma-informed adjustment protocol. I also heard about that. Gretchen cried again. Third, the king has visited 6 times in 7 days. That one Gretchen didn't cry about. She just stared at the wall for 20 minutes. Jonas sat on the edge of her desk. What's the 4th thing? What 4th thing? The thing you're doing right now at 4 a.m. instead of sleeping. Vampires don't sleep. New ones do, sometimes, if they let themselves. It's the intake form, Mira said. She showed Jonas the page she'd been staring at. Page 38 of the original intake documentation, which she'd demanded access to and which Henry had signed off on with a handwritten note. Give her whatever she asks for. H.W. Jonas looked at it. At the pre-checked consent box. Mine was pre-checked too, he said. I remember seeing it. I thought it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was policy. 179 years of policy. He was quiet for a moment. Not the Jonas shrug quiet. A different quiet. Do you think there are others, like us? I know there are. The question is how many. And if there are, then someone is going to answer for why no one asked. Jonas looked at her. For the first time since she'd met him, the casual shrug was gone. Good, he said. Good. She showed Henry that evening. She pointed to page 38, section D, subsection 4, the checkbox. 179 years, she said. This form has been in use since 1847. 179 years, and nobody questioned why the consent box was pre-checked. Because the assumption, he said quietly, is that turning is always welcome. The assumption is wrong. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. One page, clean layout, clear language. The first question, did you consent to your turning? Yes, no, I'm not sure. Below it, if no, would you like to speak with someone about your experience? He picked it up. He read it the way he read everything, completely, slowly, with the focus of a man who understood that language shaped reality. Then he set it down. How many? He said. I don't know yet. That's the point. Nobody knows because nobody has asked. I want this implemented in every wing in the court's jurisdiction. Today. All 12? All 12. Henry, that's a massive rollout. You'll need staff training, data management, a response protocol for when the no answers start coming in. Then build the protocol. She looked at him. You're asking me to design the infrastructure for a system-wide institutional reform. I'm telling you that you're the only person in this court who knows how. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say that she'd been a vampire for 3 weeks and had no standing, no authority, no institutional knowledge beyond what she'd audited with a red pen. But the compliance officer in her, the one who had spent 6 years making sure institutions did what they said they would, knew he was right. She knew how to build this. She'd been building it her entire career. I'll need an office, she said. You can use mine. I was thinking more like a closet with a desk. You can use mine. Within a week, the results came back. 18 non-consensual turnings in the last 6 months. 18 people who had checked no when finally given the option. Mira read the data in Henry's study at 2 a.m., sitting on the floor because she'd been working for 14 hours and the chair felt too formal for the weight of what she was looking at. Henry sat on the floor across from her, which she hadn't asked him to do and which she suspected was, for a 600-year-old king, the equivalent of tearing off his own crown and throwing it in a river. 18, she said. I know. Thea briefed me an hour ago. In 6 months, that's just the ones who answered, just the ones who trusted the form enough to be honest. She wiped her face. The tears were different now, thinner, cooler. Even her grief had been altered without her consent. How many in a century? How many in 2 centuries? I don't know. His jaw tightened, a ghost memory of tension, muscular rather than vascular, the way a vampire's body remembered distress even without the circulation to show it. I have been king for 300 years. This was in my jurisdiction. I didn't see it. You didn't look. No. No deflection, no justification. I didn't look. They sat with that. The study was quiet, genuinely quiet, in the way that only rooms occupied by vampires could be. No heartbeats, No breathing unless they chose to. Just the weight of institutional failure documented in her clean handwriting on a single-page form. "I need to feed," she said. She hadn't meant to say it, but the crying had cost her. Her hands were shaking again, worse than usual, and there was a pressure behind her jaw that she was learning to recognize as hunger. "Would you like me to leave?" "No." That surprised her. "Stay." She opened a blood bag from the cooler she'd started keeping in his office. O positive, room temperature. She hated this part, the way her body responded before her mind could catch up. The first sip and her hand steadied. The second and the 6 heartbeats she could always hear from the human staff faded to a murmur. The third and she could think again. She hated that it helped. She hated that it tasted like exactly what she needed. Henry watched. He didn't look away. He didn't pretend it was fine. "It gets easier," he said. "I don't want it to get easier. I want it to be unnecessary." "I know." She finished, set the bag down. Her hands were still. For the first time in 3 weeks, her hands were actually still. He noticed. Of course, he noticed. He noticed everything about her, in the quiet way that she was beginning to understand wasn't clinical or political. It was specific. It was her. "Your hands," he said. She looked at them, steady. "Huh. That's the first time." "I know." She turned them over, examined them like they belonged to someone else. These hands that used to hold coffee she didn't need, and tomatoes she didn't cook, and a red pen that circled institutional failures. These hands that now steadied with blood. "I'm going to need another minute with this." He didn't rush her. After a while, he stood and walked to the window, opened it. Cool air flooded in, not cold, but carrying the specific quality of 2 a.m. air, the settled weight of a city asleep. "Come here," he said. She went. The window looked out over the court's private grounds, old trees, a stone path, the kind of landscaping that had been maintained for centuries by people who understood that some things should outlast the people who planted them. "What am I looking at?" "Tell me what you see." She looked, and then she really looked, the way she hadn't yet, the way her new eyes could, but she hadn't let them. The moonlight wasn't white, it was layered, silver on the stone, blue-green on the grass, a faint violet at the edges of the tree shadows. She could see the grain of bark on a tree 60 feet away. She could see a moth's wings flexing on a leaf. She could see the specific pattern of frost forming on the window frame, each crystal distinct. "Oh," she said, "it's not the same as morning." "No." She was quiet. "It's not nothing, though." "No, it's not nothing." "I didn't know I could see like this." She pressed her fingers against the glass. "The frost, I can see the individual crystals. In a year, you'll be able to hear them form." "You're serious?" "Entirely." "What else? What else can I do that nobody told me?" He considered this. "You can navigate in total darkness, not clumsily, precisely. Your spatial awareness extends further than you've tested." That would have been useful information during the orientation. Instead, I got, "Your nights are your oyster." You can hear a conversation from 3 buildings away if you focus. I can barely not hear it. Focusing isn't the problem. Unfocusing is. That's the calibration, the same principle as the pen. He paused. Your body wants to take in everything. You need to choose what to let in. Choose. She tested the word. I haven't felt like I've chosen anything in 3 weeks. You chose to redesign the intake form. You chose to stay angry when everyone told you to be grateful. You chose to let me sit with you tonight. He was quiet. Not all your choices were taken. She was quiet for a long time after that, looking at the frost, at the layered moonlight, at the world she hadn't asked for, being shown to her by a man she hadn't asked for either. She looked at him. He was watching her the way she was watching the frost, with the quiet attention of someone seeing something for the first time. Except he'd had 600 years of nights. The thing he was seeing for the first time wasn't the night, it was her seeing it. They were standing close. 4 inches, she could tell because her new senses cataloged everything, whether she wanted them to or not. And right now they were cataloging the precise temperature differential between his shoulder and the air around it. He ran cold. The air ran colder near him. 4 inches of cold air between his shoulder and hers. She turned her head. He was already looking at her. His eyes caught the moonlight from the window and the amber at the edges flared. Not the full shift, not the predator-present flood, just a flicker. A tell. Like a hand almost reaching, almost, and then pulling back. "We should," he started. "Yeah," she said. Neither of them moved. "The case files," he said. "Right, the case files." He stepped back, 1 step, controlled. The way you step back from the edge of something when you realize how close you've gotten. They went back to the floor, back to the case files, back to the work. But the 4 inches of space at the window had said something that neither of them was ready to say out loud. She reached for his hand. Not thinking, just reaching, the way you reach for something solid when the ground shifts. His fingers were cool and perfectly still. Hers were warmer. Newly turned vampires ran warmer, blood still close to human temperature, and not shaking for the first time in 23 days. He went very still, a different still from all the others she'd catalogued, the still of a man who hadn't been touched without purpose in a very long time. "Your hand is cold," she said. "Always." "How long is always?" 600 years of always. She didn't let go. He didn't pull away. His hand in hers, the first quiet thing she'd felt since she woke up dead in a dumpster bay. Thea's entry that night. Day 7. Sat with her while she fed. Did not speak, did not leave. She stopped shaking. He noticed. She touched his hand. He didn't breathe for 4 minutes. He's in trouble. Chapter 4. The Case Study. The reform proposal was excellent. Mira had to admit that, even later, even after. Henry's legal team had taken her intake data and built a comprehensive framework: mandatory consent verification for all turnings, criminal accountability for non-consensual turners, a victim advocacy office in every wing, and, the part that made Mira's compliance officer heart actually flutter, a formal audit trail linking every turning to documented, witnessed, time-stamped consent. The enforcement mechanism needs work, Henry told her. They were in his study. She'd been spending evenings there for 2 weeks now, reviewing documentation with the trained eye of someone who understood how institutions used language to hide. Voluntary compliance without sanctions is decorative. "That is the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." He looked at her. The half-second pause she'd learned to read as the moment when something she'd said landed somewhere he didn't expect. "I was discussing legislative enforcement." "I know, I'm teasing you." "I see." He did not entirely see, but he wasn't confused. He was recalibrating. 600 years of court composure encountering something it hadn't filed under any existing category. "You do that." "Tease you?" "Make me..." He stopped, started again. "The proposal needs review before the council session." "What were you going to say?" "Nothing relevant to the proposal." Henry, the first time she'd used his name without the title. They both heard it. The room shifted by 1 degree. "You make me reconsider things I had considered settled," he said. Very carefully, like each word was a diplomatic concession. That is disorienting for someone who settled most things by the 16th century. She wanted to push it. She wanted to hear what the rest of that sentence sounded like without the diplomatic framing. But she was also learning to read when a 600-year-old man was as close to the edge of his composure as he got, and this was close. "Show me the enforcement section," she said. They worked side by side. She noticed that when she sat close enough for their arms to almost touch, his handwriting changed. Slightly less controlled, slightly more human. She didn't mention it. She sat close anyway. 2 weeks into the reform push, Mira heard the meeting she wasn't supposed to hear. A wrong turn in the court's labyrinthine corridors. A conference room with the door ajar. Voices she recognized. Henry's chief political advisor, a cold-eyed vampire named Aldrich, who smiled like he'd learned the expression from a diagram. The Walsh data gives us everything we need. 18 cases in 6 months. The conservatives can't argue with numbers. And the Walsh case specifically? The sympathetic face of the initiative. Young, articulate, 3 weeks old and already reshaping our intake process. She's the best argument we've ever had. Does she know she's being positioned? She doesn't need to know. The king is handling her. Handling. The word landed like something she recognized. She'd sat in conference rooms exactly like this one in her human life, and heard managers use exactly this language about employees whose stories were useful. The case study. The sympathetic face. The person who didn't need to know they were being positioned. She'd written reports about this. She'd flagged this exact pattern in institutional behavior assessments and recommended corrective action, and gotten ignored because the optics were useful and the person being used didn't know yet. She was the person being used, again, by an institution, without her knowledge, without her consent. She stood in that corridor for a long time, long enough that the voices in the conference room moved on to logistics, implementation timelines, council vote projections, public framing. Her name came up 4 more times. Each time it was a data point, not a person. She didn't storm in. 6 years of HR had taught her that the dramatic confrontation was never as effective as the quiet one. She waited until that evening, in his study, with a reform proposal between them. "I heard your strategy meeting," she said. He went still. Not the good stillness, the political one. The one that meant he was calculating. "Aldrich's briefing," he said, not a question. "The sympathetic face of the initiative. The king is handling her. Aldrich's language is not mine. But the strategy is." He didn't deny it. She watched him not deny it, and the HR officer in her, the woman who had spent 6 years distinguishing between institutional care and institutional performance, felt something crack. "The reforms were needed," he said, "long before you. But I made them convenient." "Yes. When did you know that my case was useful?" "Mira. When? Before you came to the wing or after?" He was quiet for 3 seconds, which, for a vampire who could process centuries of political calculation in a heartbeat, was an eternity. "Before." Before. She let the word sit. "So when you walked into the integration wing, the first time the king had visited in a century, the first time anyone with authority had noticed the consent checkbox, that was strategy. It was response to a flagged case. A flagged case that happened to give you the leverage you'd been waiting decades for. The case was real. Your experience was real. The fact that it also served a political purpose does not what? Make it less real? Because that's exactly what it does. That's exactly how institutions work. I have spent 6 years watching companies use employees' stories to justify changes that were already on the agenda. We care deeply about this issue. They always care deeply, right around the time it becomes politically useful to care. This is not a corporation. No, it's worse. It's a monarchy with a 600-year-old king who sat on my floor at 2 a.m. and let me think. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. The new vampire tension, muscular and sharp. "You let me think it was about me. It was about you. It was about 18 data points and a sympathetic face and the political capital you've been building since before I was born. And the rest?" Her voice shifted, steadier now, professional. The voice she'd used in termination meetings when the facts were ugly and the person across the desk deserved the truth. "The visits. Sitting with me while I fed, asking what I miss. The pen." She held up her hand, the one that had learned to hold a pen without breaking it because he'd spent 20 minutes teaching her. Was the pen standard procedure? No. Immediate. No calculation. That was not. The Tuesday mornings, my farmer's market, the aspirational tomatoes. Was that data collection? You know it wasn't. I don't know that. That's the problem. She stood. Her hands were shaking again. The steadiness she'd found, the quiet his presence gave her, gone. I am very, very good at telling the difference between a person who cares and an institution using someone's pain for leverage. I did it for a living. And right now, I can't tell which one you are. She picked up the reform proposal. I want my name removed from the documentation. Mira, I didn't consent to being your most useful case study. I thought we agreed that consent was the point. She left. He didn't follow. She could feel, in the strange new way that proximity to him had started to register, a pull, an awareness she didn't have a name for, that he stayed exactly where she'd left him, perfectly still. The stillness of a man who had just heard the only argument he couldn't win. In the corridor, she passed Thea. The older vampire looked at her, then at the study door, and her pen stopped moving. He didn't know, Thea said quietly, about Aldrich's framing. The word handling, that wasn't his. He knew enough. Yes, Thea didn't argue, didn't defend, just nodded once, with the expression of someone who had watched this king make mistakes for 400 years and had long ago accepted that her job was documentation, not prevention. He did. Thea found him an hour later, still at his desk. He hadn't moved. The reform proposal was where Mira had set it down, and he hadn't touched it. She's gone back to the wing, Thea said. Good, she should be somewhere that feels safe. Your study felt safe to her, until today. He didn't respond to that. She'll come back, Thea tried. She shouldn't have to. His voice was very quiet, stripped of the composure, the diplomatic precision, the 600 years of court training. Just a man in a room. That is the entire point. She should be able to walk away and have it mean walked away. She has had enough people making choices about her life without consulting her. And you've had enough of being the person who makes those choices? I have been making choices for other people for 300 years. I have never once considered that the thing I was best at might also be the thing I was worst at. He looked at his hands, perfectly still. She taught me to hold a pen. Did you know that? You already knew how to hold a pen. She taught me to hold a pen like it mattered. Thea was quiet for a long moment. Then, what are you going to do? I don't know. That's new. You always know. Yes. He looked at the reform proposal on his desk, the document that had been the most important thing in his political life until 30 days ago. I always know. I have known what to do in every situation for 300 years. And now a woman with a red pen and a one-page intake form has made me not know, and I cannot even tell you whether it is the worst or the best thing that has happened to me since I took this throne. Both, Thea said. Obviously. Obviously. She opened her notebook and wrote. Day 14. He broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. The worst kind. Chapter 5. The 3-Star Review. Henry Whitlock recused himself from the consent reform initiative on a Tuesday. Mira found out on Wednesday, from Thea, who arrived at the integration wing carrying 2 blood bags and wearing the expression of a woman who had waited 4 centuries for something to go right and was watching it go sideways with the calm of a veteran. He did what? Recused, formally, in writing. Thea set the blood bags on Mira's desk. Mira had a desk now, in the corner of the wing's intake office, covered in draft forms and red pens. He's appointed an independent commission. Elder Beatrice Crane, no faction loyalty, no political stake, to oversee the reforms and the individual cases, including yours. He had the votes. The proposal was going to pass. Yes. The first major consent reform in the court's history. Yes. And he dropped it. He didn't drop the reform. He dropped his involvement. The commission will carry it forward, or it won't, on its own merits, without his leverage. Thea paused. His allies are furious. Aldrich attempted to rescind the filing. Henry told him, "Let me find the exact quote." She opened the notebook. "The reforms will stand on their own merit, or they will not stand at all. They will not stand on the back of one woman's violation being used as political currency." He said that? He wrote it. The written version is always more precise with him. Thea closed the notebook. "He told me not to come here. And yet, if I obeyed every instruction that man gave me, the court would have collapsed in 1789. He tells people not to do the thing he wants them to do. He has done this for 6 centuries. It is his most consistent personality flaw, and I have documented it extensively." "Why are you telling me this?" Thea opened her notebook again, turned it so Mira could read specific entries. Clean handwriting, 400 years steady. Day 1. Claimed standard procedure. No such procedure exists. Day 2. He smiled. Denied smiling. Day 3. She laughed. He noticed. He noticed. He noticed. Day 5. Used her first name without being prompted. First use of a subject's first name in 91 years. Day 7. Sat with her while she fed. Did not speak. Did not leave. Day 10. His handwriting changed when she sat close. Marginally less controlled. Day 12. She used his name without the title. He heard it. I heard him hear it. Day 14. He broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. The worst kind. Day 16. He recused himself from the reform initiative, surrendered the political capital of a generation. Did not hesitate. "I have documented this court for 400 years, Thea said. I have watched him negotiate, strategize, compromise, and occasionally destroy people who deserved it. In 400 years, I have never seen him surrender a political advantage because one person asked him to." She closed the notebook. "He has many flaws. Performing care is not one of them." Mira looked at the notebook, at the clean handwriting, at the entry that read Day 7, the night on the floor with the blood bag and the spreadsheet, and the first time her hands had been still. "He sat with me," she said, "while I fed. He didn't look away." No. Why would someone do that? Sit with someone through the worst part of what they've become? Because he understood that the worst part wasn't the blood. Thea stood. It was doing it alone. Mira found him in his study at midnight. The reform proposal was still on the desk, marked with his recusal stamp in red ink. He was reading. An actual book. Paper. Old. Which she'd learned was his version of not working. Which was itself his version of rest. Which was itself his version of waiting for something he had no right to expect. "Your chief of staff disobeyed a direct order to come see me," she said from the doorway. "Yes." He didn't look surprised. "She does that." She showed me her notebook. Now he looked up, the composure cracking along lines she'd learned to read. The jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands went from perfectly still to almost still, which for him was practically a breakdown. She was not authorized to share that. And yet, Mira came into the room. She didn't sit, not yet. "You recused yourself." "Yes." "You had the votes." "Yes." "You gave up decades of political work because I told you to stop. You told me your case was being used without your consent. I had the ability to stop that. I stopped it. And if the reforms die without you, then I will find another way, one that does not require your pain as a foundation." She sat down. Across from him, the desk between them covered in the wreckage of institutional change. The reform proposal, the recusal stamp, 18 case files, the intake form she'd designed. 1 page, clear language, the question nobody had asked for 179 years. "Both things were true," she said. "The politics and the care." "Yes." Simultaneously. "Yes." "That's not simple." "No." I hate that it's not simple. So do I. I'm still angry. Good. She looked at him. Good? You should be angry. Not at me specifically, though that is also justified, but at the system that made your turning a bureaucratic footnote for 3 weeks before anyone noticed. Your anger found 18 people who had been invisible. Your anger redesigned a form that hadn't been questioned in almost 2 centuries. He paused. I would not ask you to be less angry. Your anger is the most productive force this court has encountered since I took the throne. You're not supposed to compliment someone's rage in the middle of an apology. I am not apologizing. Excuse me? I am acknowledging that both things were true, the care and the politics. I cannot apologize for the politics. The reforms were needed. They will save people, and I would use every tool available to pass them. I can acknowledge that making you a tool without your knowledge was a violation of the principle I claimed to be fighting for. He held her gaze. And I can tell you that the care was not a tool. The care was not strategic. The care was the most inconvenient thing that has happened to me in 300 years, and I would not undo it. She was quiet. That was eloquent. I've had 600 years of practice. It wasn't an apology, though. No, it was a statement of fact. You prefer facts to apologies. You told me that on day 4. I was listening. She almost laughed. Almost. You remember what I said on day 4? I remember everything you've said. It's extremely inconvenient. She stood, came around the desk. He watched her move toward him with the focused attention of a predator who had decided, very deliberately, not to move. She stopped close enough to touch. I can tell when someone is performing care, she said. I've done it professionally for 6 years. You weren't performing. No. The politics were real too. Yes. And you gave them up because I asked. Because you were right to ask. She kissed him. In his study. No candlelight, no grand setting. Papers everywhere, the reform proposal, the recusal stamp, 18 files of people turned without consent and told to be grateful. A room full of documented failure and 2 vampires in the middle of it. For 1 second, he didn't move. The absolute stillness of a predator holding every instinct in check. She could feel it. The effort, the centuries of control locked down tight. The deliberate choice not to reach for her even though every line of his body was oriented toward her like a compass finding north. Then his hand came up. Her jaw. Careful, precise, 600 years of control in the placement of his fingers. His thumb against her cheekbone, cool against her skin. And then, not careful at all. He kissed her back like a man who had forgotten how, and then remembered, and then forgot again because remembering meant thinking, and thinking meant this might stop. She was warm in the way that newly turned vampires were warm, blood still running close to human temperature, and the contrast, her warmth, his centuries of cold, registered in every place they touched. His other hand found the curve of her waist and pulled her closer, and she went. She just went. Because the thing about being near him was that it was the only time since the turning that the world wasn't too loud. She felt his jaw clench against hers. The ghost memory of restraint, the effort of not something. She pulled back 1/2 inch. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them, the amber she'd sometimes caught at the edges now flooding the full iris. Not red, not frightening, just present. The thing behind the composure, the thing behind 600 years of standard procedure. Looking at her. Your eyes, she said. I know. Rough. Lower than his usual register by 1/2 an octave. Does that happen often? It has not happened in this room before. She put her hand on his chest. No heartbeat. Nothing. Just the stillness of a body that had stopped keeping time 300 years before she was born. But his hands were shaking. Your hands, she said. That hasn't happened in some time. How long is some time? A considerable period. Henry. 300 years. She took his hands, held them between hers. His, cold, long-fingered, centuries of composure now trembling. Hers, warmer, steadier than they'd been in weeks, the steadiness she'd found on that floor when he'd sat with her while she fed. 300 years since someone made you shake. I am the king. Kings do not. Your chief of staff would like to document this. Dorothea can document it from outside the room. She's probably already in the corridor. She is definitely already in the corridor. From beyond the door, faintly, the scratch of a pen in a notebook. Mira laughed. He smiled. Not the diplomatic half-expression she'd seen in court. A real smile, unguarded, bewildered. The smile of a man who had forgotten his face could do that. 2 weeks later, the Independent Commission issued its first reform package. Mandatory consent verification. Criminal accountability for non-consensual turners. A victim advocacy office in every wing. Mira's intake form, 1 page, clear language, the question first, adopted as the standard across all 12 regional courts. The Commission's second act was quieter. Formal criminal charges against the rogue who had turned Mira. Not a spectacle. Not a political statement. Just accountability, processed through the system she'd helped build, documented on the forms she'd designed. She didn't attend the hearing. She didn't need to. The system worked. That was the point. 43 non-consensual turning cases identified since implementation. 43 people who had been told to be grateful and had finally been asked if they were. Mira submitted her updated satisfaction survey on a Wednesday. She left it on his desk between a treaty and a requisition form, folded once. Henry unfolded it with the gravity he gave everything she wrote. Under areas of improvement, the king's oversight visits to the integration wing remain insufficiently scheduled. He arrives unannounced, disrupts established processes, and displays a persistent inability to maintain professional boundaries. 3 stars. Under additional comments, however, the revised intake form has been adopted across all 12 regional wings. 43 additional cases identified. The Independent Commission has issued comprehensive reform. The king was not formally involved. His chief of staff was. He set the survey down, looked at her. 3 stars. 3 stars. Out of 5. Out of 5. That is below the standard I consider acceptable. Then improve. What would constitute 4 stars? Better scheduling. A formal grievance process for the wing, not just the form. And the blood selection in my fridge is still exclusively O positive. I've submitted 3 requests. And 5? She leaned across the desk. You'll have to figure that out yourself. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, completely, slowly, with the attention of a man who understood that the things that mattered most were the things you noticed when you stopped moving. I will work on it, he said. From the doorway, the scratch of a pen. Thea's final entry. Day 30. 3 stars. He's going to earn the other 2. I'm going to document every one.